I would like nothing more.
WGTV will be in River.
Not to have to talk about this bullshit. But unfortunately, what choice do I have? As I have said on several occasions now, when it's gone, it's gone. And if nobody's willing to raise their voice, do whatever they can do, it won't be anybody's fault but our own if it all disappears. So in spite of impossible odds and people behind the scenes trying to suppress the message, ain't no choice but to keep going. And that's just the way it is. So how does this all work? What did they do to set up their little system behind the scenes? Well, first thing that you have to understand is that you don't have to corrupt the whole system. It's not necessary to take over an entire agency when all you have to do is take over the people who run it. The same rule applies to the way the deep state operates. Once the presidency slipped out of their control, they no longer ran the show. They may run factions of it or have other agencies turn rogue against the guy who's sitting at the top. But in order to have this all work and come together, you have to have your person. In this case was Hillary Clinton, and in the case of 2020, it would appear that the establishment leans towards Joe Biden, to be able to do and accomplish the things that they want to do. What's that? Well, I've mentioned that on several occasions, but we might as well review. It's take down America, diminish its power in the world, because a strong America is not within the globalist best interest. As a matter of fact, the more chaos they can spread, the more they can undermine the confidence of the rest of the world in this country, the better it is for them. Because it should be fairly obvious by now that they have gained footholds all over the world, and we're next. Or we were next. Until the American people actually got to use their voices. In other words, turning out in such numbers for Trump that even their election fraud, which had already been in place, and has been in place for quite some time actually, didn't work. Because contrary to popular opinion, They hadn't taken over everything yet. One side of the coin was no different than the other up until 2016. And that's something a lot of people just refuse to believe. When the evidence and or the work on both sides says different. They wouldn't be doing all this shit if Trump was one of them. So you don't have to control all of Google when you can control or influence the people at the top. Even to the point where you get them to change their hiring practices so that they hire people who are more of the influence of the political ideas that the deep state would just assume promote. Those people are easier to get on board because they're already leaning that way in the first place. You don't have to control all of CNN when you already have the guy who runs it in your hip pocket. See how this works yet? It's not the everyday people, for the most part, that are the problem here. Are there everyday people involved? Yes, there are. But for the most part, they're low-hanging fruit. And that's how all this works. And that's why they have been able to accomplish so much, because no one's willing to acknowledge how all this works. We got better things to do. There's football games, there's basketball games, there's golf, there's millions of other things to do besides look at the machinery that dictates the way our lives go. And that's just dumb. I'm so glad that I quit watching sports. And it all started for me with the NFL when they started kneeling for the American flag. Because I've spent a lot of time in a lot of places around this country, and racism is not as big of a deal as it's been made out to be. And when they started kneeling on the sidelines, it got my attention. And I decided, instead of watching football, I'll start watching politics and digging into what it's all about. And I'm glad I did, because it's the best game out there. If you know how all this works and see how everything's unfolding, this kicks the shit out of any football game I ever saw. And I've seen some doozies. Any Daytona 500 I ever watched. And I've seen some good ones. Because as I have said before on several occasions, there's a hell of a lot more going on here than meets the eye. And you have to delve into the ins and outs of what goes on, who's who and what's what in order to figure it out. Because just because you know the quarterback has a good, strong arm on the field doesn't necessarily mean you know the game or what the outcome might be. But I get it. You don't know me. I'm just some guy on YouTube. But I know me, and I trust my judgment. Because this isn't no different than being well educated on football. And I used to be able to call the play if the coach was doing his job right before the coach even called it. And I knew what had to be done on the racetrack before the car even got to pit lane. At least wise, strategy-wise. So I trust my judgment, even if you don't. Even though other people have made half-assed, reasonable arguments along the way. As I've said on many occasions, it's all about the work. Who's doing what? Who's following through with what they say? And who's just talking shit, trying to make excuses for the things that they didn't get done, as opposed to the ones that are actually getting the job done. I don't really consider myself a Democrat, but I will say, as I've said before, left, right, or straight down the middle, if they're not serving the Constitution, they're not serving us. And the most reasonable Democratic voice in their field of candidates for the president is Tulsi Gabbard. And they are dead set against that girl. As a matter of fact, they're doing just about everything they can to undermine her message. And people should think about what that means and why they're trying to do that. Because she has said she wants to uphold the Constitution. She has said on several occasions that she would like to end endless wars. So why would they keep coming out against her and calling her a Russian asset, which is a completely ridiculous freaking notion? It's simple, and it should be obvious to anybody who's paying attention, that the people who strive to have the power in the established government don't have the best interests of this country and the Constitution in mind. And it goes right down the line, from the intelligence agencies to the news networks to the social media companies and the policies that they promote that aren't within the guidelines of the Constitution. It should be fairly obvious to a lot of people by now, even though those that don't know a damn thing about the game, that something ain't right here, that something's changed. And the people who have been hiding behind the scenes, claiming their honor and integrity and honesty of all things, which is completely laughable. Art. And when somebody comes along who threatens that, they attack them. They run them down. Because, as I've said before, there is no honor among thieves. And the biggest fear of chicken shit people is being caught at the bullshit that they're actually up to. It's part of not having a code of honor. We've all seen it, and it's usually most obvious in children. They're not upset at what they did and themselves when it all falls apart. They're more upset that they got caught. And that's what drives a lot of this, is fear and the lack of honor and responsibility for people who should be more than willing to stand up to their misdeeds. Yet they keep running, they keep making excuses, and pissing in the Kool-Aid of freedom, hoping they can dilute it enough so that they can take advantage of all of us and rule the whole thing and never have to pay the consequences. And now that my phone fell off the rear view, I suppose I'll wrap it up like this. Like it or not, believe it or not, that's where we're at. This is a lot like trying to rebuild a carburetor. And I don't know how many of you have actually done that. But first you gotta tear it down, then you clean out the sludge, and then you recalibrate and replace the pieces and reassemble it. We're just to the part now where the sludge is being cleaned out and exposed.